Hey, I'm Mike Gafa, and on today's Whiteboard Wednesday, I want to talk to you about fear, fact, faith, and leadership. Because we can lead out of fear, we can lead out of fact, or we can lead out of faith. And we know the right answer, it's the one on the right. But to lead out of fear is something that leaders do quite a bit. So Hebrews 29:25 says this, that fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. But so often, we don't trust in the Lord. We trust more in ourselves. We trust in our own judgment. We do things that don't imply trust in God, and instead we just kind of go on our own way. And think about it this way. If we're fear-based, if we're trusting more in ourselves than in God, think about the servant who took his talent. You know the biblical story, the parable that Jesus told, one with 10, one with 5, and one with 1 talent. The servant with 1 talent buried it in the ground, and he went to sort of reconcile with the master, and he said, look, I have this talent, I buried it in the ground, I knew you were a hard man, reaping where you did not sow. Clearly he didn't know the master, who of course is a representation of God. But we do the same thing too in some of our churches when we take the talents that we have, the resources that we have in our churches, and we don't use those to effectively steward what God has given us. Instead, we bury them in a sense because we're not using them the way we should. And so to do that is somewhat fear-based because we're taking our talents, we're burying them in the ground, and that creates paralysis. That's what happens. It's spiritual paralysis. It keeps us stuck in place. It causes us to bury what we have, the resources that God has given us for His glory and His purpose, and we bury them. And then there's to be fact-based. So Proverbs 3:5 says to trust in the Lord with all our heart, lean not on our own understanding. That's pretty clear. But to be fact-based is to want every I dotted, every T crossed. We want data, we want lots of data. We're not going to make decisions until we know everything that we think we need to know. So give me all the spreadsheets, give me all the financial information. This is what happens when we become super fact-based. We're data-driven and not gospel-driven. We can get that turned around. So data is not the enemy. We just get off track. And when that happens, it's not spiritual paralysis. It's something more like spiritual blindness. And so paradoxically, we think the more we have, the better our decisions are going to be, which in one sense is true, but when we become obsessed with wanting to know everything with all the facts, all the data, we actually become blind, spiritually speaking. And that brings us then to the third place, or the third aspect. We can lead out of faith. Hebrews 11:2 says, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. This is what we're commended for. And so we don't rely, we don't bury what we have. We're not fear-based. We don't need to know everything. We need to know some things, but we're not consumed with having to know everything, so we're not fact-based. Instead, we're faith-based. And God commends us for that. Thanks for listening.